Hey everyone, this is John from EastCoastArmory.com, and I'm here today with a model showcase video for this 1/16 scale radio control command variant of the late production German Tiger I. This model here was built for commission and belongs to a private collector. Like I frequently mention in these videos, I often take on commission build projects from models ranging between 1/35 scale and 1/6 scale. For availability and pricing information, that information would be best by contacting me through the email address listed below, which is info@EastCoastArmory.com. Just like with the other 1/16 scale builds that are found on this channel, this model here did receive a detail upgrade as well as a conversion in order to bring the model up to the command variant of the Tiger I that we have here. However, because of all this information, I can't go ahead and condense that all into one self-contained video because the length would be far too long. So just like with those other 1/16 scale rebuilds, this model showcase video here is going to be cut up into 3 parts. In part 1, or in other words, in the video that we're watching right now, I'm going to go ahead and go back to when the model was first started in order to give a good idea on what the base starter kit supplies us with. This would include a thorough in-box review, as well as going over what the stock model supplies you with, as well as what other mechanical and electrical features that are supplied with this basic kit. Along those lines, we're also going to be discussing several aspects of the rebuild during the model's construction, as well as some tutorials and other things to look out for in order to improve the model past the base stock original kit offering. In video number 2, I'm going to be going over exclusively the model's exterior details and fittings, where I'll be going over in more depth the other small modifications and detail tweaks that were made to this model in order to further enhance it from the stock original offering. And because this model here is fully radio controlled, the third and final chapter will be dedicated solely to the model being put through its paces on a test drive. There, I'll walk over the model's mechanical and electrical functions and put the model through its paces on both on and off-road conditions. So needless to say, there's going to be a ton of information coming at you guys. So with that, grab a bucket of popcorn, sit back in your chair, and without further ado, let's dig into this video series by first going back to when this model was first started. And here's the model at the start of the build. For the base starter kit, I'll be utilizing this 1/16 scale RTR late production Tiger I from Taigen Tanks. Now for anyone who's a fan of the channel, this should seem pretty familiar because I've frequently done rebuilds on several of the Taigen tanks in the past. However, unlike those models which start off as scratch and dent specials and the model arrives in a damaged state and I repair them to the completed condition that you see at the end of the video, with this model here, this one is going to start off as a factory fresh rendition. Realistically, this model here is more in line of what you're going to get if you order a model directly from TaigenTanks.com. Now, like I said before, the tanks were procured from TaigenTanks.com, and TaigenTanks.com is really the retail end for the Taigen tanks from the IMEX model company. IMEX is an importer of plastic model kits, and they are probably, if not the sole, but definitely one of the largest importers of the Taigen brand tanks in the United States. In addition to the Taigen brand tanks, they also import many of the Toro models as well. Now, aside from selling the models themselves, TaigenTanks.com also offers for sale many of the detail hop-up components which are made by Taigen. This includes many of the metal suspension upgrades, as well as also the gearboxes, and not to forget many of the electronic packages that are offered by the Taigen model company. Time to crack open the box. Here we have the original shipping carton from TaigenTanks.com. Notice it comes with the IMEX branded label. The box does a good job of sealing off the contents on the inside, which in this case, of course, is going to be our late production Tiger I. With the shipping carton removed, here you can see the retail packaging. Now, this type of box here should be very familiar to anyone who has looked up these Taigen RC tank review videos on YouTube. Not to mention my own Taigen rebuild videos as well. The model comes in this very plain retail box. The vehicle in question is just in black and white. Here we have the basic typeface. Note the IMEX plastic model company, or the importer. Now, this does change depending on which type of market of the vehicle that you're purchasing. If you're in Europe, I believe it says Taigen tanks here, or I believe it might say Toro if you're out in Germany. Anyway, the rest of the packaging is basically the same. Same type of carton, nothing really fancy to point out. So with that out of the way, let's go ahead and open the sarcophagus. With the top cover removed, here we have the model's inner carton with a flip up little lid, and we can finally get to the inner contents. Now the way you see the packaging is exactly how the model arrived. When the model did arrive, I did take it out to inspect it, make sure it was free of any blemishes, took the tank for a quick test drive to see if the electronics ran, and then I just really sealed it up and placed it back in its carton until I was ready to actually start on it. On the very top, here we have the instruction manual. Just the basic verbiage required just to get the model up and running. No point to really go over that. This model here is the IR version. This was requested by the customer to be the type of base starter kit to work on, and it gives you this little IR battle system plug-in module. Going on further, it takes us to this little box of accessories. Now this is quite typical for these Taigen kits. One thing I always found interesting was that on the box here there's a picture of a French AMX-30, which seems to be an odd choice of vehicle since it's not really particularly that significant in terms of, you know, tank popularity, but there are also no AMX-30s in 1/16 scale, so it's an interesting choice, I suppose. Opening up the box gives you just the standard detail components. Here we have the metal MG42, a bucket, as well as the machine gun mount. Now, as the video progresses, I'll describe why the MG42 is not going to be used on this model, and it's a little bit of a dubious accessory. Also supplied are a set of metal tow cables. Now these tow cables are a nice addition that these models supply you with. However, it's important to point out that the model itself does have the appropriate tow cable detailing pre-installed and fitted. These ones here are just an extra bit of equipment and are supplied with the metal upgraded renditions of the Taigen tanks. I suppose they give you these in case you want to play around with your model and have it be able to tow either another vehicle or some other type of an object. It's a nice little bit of equipment, however, that they give you. Going down deeper takes us to this little bag here of Futaba, or I should say hobby grade RC connectors. Now this model here is the most current rendition of the Taigen RC electronic package. And one of the changes that they made was the ability to replace the stock radio which comes with these models with a hobby grade radio. This is something that's again a new feature and is one that seems to be pretty popular. Basically you plug these jacks into the motherboard, and these jacks here plug into the corresponding units on a Futaba or other type of RX, which then allows you to drive the tank with a better, more higher quality radio system. It's not going to be used on this build, but again, it's just one thing I want to point out that is supplied with these more recent release of Taigen vehicles. And finally, on the bottom gives you some sticker type markings, which I never utilize. And there's also a tank commander inside the bag. Oh, we also have here a metal jack, or I should say a plastic jack. Here goes the tank commander with the typical Taigen googly eyes, like he just saw something, maybe a Joseph Stalin II or an M26 Pershing. There's his headset, but also we have here some rear muff flaps. And a set of hull-mounted S-mine canisters. Now these are interesting that they give you this because the S-mines were really something that didn't continue into the mid and late production Tiger era, and these are generally more or less found on early production units, but it's a nice little bit of accessory that they give you. These pieces here are not going to be fitted to this model and are more likely going to be going into the spare bin and definitely used on any number of future possible builds that come down the pipeline. Now, by the way, all these components I just showed are also offered separately on the TaigenTanks.com website. With all this out of the way, let's take apart the styrofoam sarcophagus. And these are typical, again, on these RTR Taigens and do an adequate job in keeping everything where they need to be, unless you're dealing with one of the scratch and dent specials, which are my usual MO. Also on the inside, these little foam straps, they work pretty good at keeping everything at bay. Okay, now here's the model and the radio and the battery all housed in its carton. Let's go ahead and pop these guys out to get a better look at them. Okay, and here's the model now out of its sarcophagus, and the model itself comes in this bubble wrap blanket, which is again pretty typical. Over here we have the supplied radio. These are also typical for these Taigen models. On the inside here, we have the two little metal plugs, which are used to give you the sticks to control the model. The radio itself is pretty much simple, and I'll go over that in more depth in the driving portion of this video series, which will probably be in video number 3. Here we have the supplied battery, as well as the charger. Nothing really to write home about. If anything, I'm probably not going to be utilizing this supplied battery, as I generally swap these out with an aftermarket battery that has higher amps. Having said that though, these batteries are more than enough to get you up and running and off the ground, and if you're just a casual RC runner of these things, this battery here should work well for you. And here's the model now out of its bubble wrap packaging. Like I said before, this model here is a late production, metal upgraded Taigen Tiger I, and this guy here is factory fresh. When you purchase the premium or the metal upgraded late Tiger, this is the model that you will be getting. Now, if anyone's wondering what separates this version compared to the baseline plastic version that's offered by Taigen, well, it's very simple. This model here features many of the metal accessories which would need to be added to the plastic edition in order to bring it up to similar specs. In addition to those features, something like, say, the metal running gear, the sprockets and the idler, the track, and the gearbox, this model here also features the metal turret. Now, because of that, this model here is going to be much heavier compared to the standard baseline plastic edition of the Taigen. Now, because of the metal turret, this vehicle here is going to be considerably heavier compared to even a plastic Taigen that has been upgraded with the metal track or the metal wheels, like I frequently mention and add on my other builds that are found on the ECA channel. Another bit of accessory that is included on these metal upgraded Taigens are the grille work. You'll notice that this model here already has, stock out of the box, the Photowetch grille covers already added. Generally, these are absent on the plastic editions and need to be added by the builder as an aftermarket accessory. Now, another dead giveaway that this is the metal upgraded version of the Taigen is the model's paint scheme. The metal upgraded ones are painted better compared to the baseline plastic editions, which are either painted in an overcoat of this really bright yellow color or a dark Panther gray type coloring. With the metal ones, they do have this better paint scheme that you see here, where it's a camouflage scheme, which is spray gunned or airbrushed on, and then there's some kind of attempt of some black airbrush edging that you see on this model, which for this build is actually going to be completely irrelevant because the model itself, of course, is going to be completely rebuilt and repainted by myself, and this paint scheme here is going to be for naught. Which, by the way, is one of the reasons why I tend to opt for the Scratch and Dent Special, is because I kind of feel bad in having to paint over a model that already has the paintwork like you see here. Not because of any paint thicknesses or any other reason, I just don't like repainting other people's work. However, for this one here, that's just not going to be the case. Now, if anyone's wondering, why didn't I just try to find this model and build it as a Scratch and Dent Special, since I want to rebuild and paint it anyway? Well, keep in mind, this model here is being built for a customer, and he does want to have a factory fresh model out of the gate. And also, keep in mind, when it comes to the Scratch and Dent Specials, they are on a first come, first served basis, and whatever's on the market is what's on the market. And unfortunately, when the customer and I went for starting this project, a model of these specifications were not present on the Scratch and Dent section. Now, on the topic of the paint scheme on the model is not inaccurate and is actually based off of a late production numbered 312. Right next to this one here, you can see my rendition of Tiger 312 that I did a few months ago. This model here has a whole video series found on the ECA channel where I go over the model start all the way up through the finishing. In a nutshell, this model here was very similar to this one in that this one here is a late production Taigen, ready to run Tiger I, but this one here started off as a Scratch and Dent Special and was an all plastic rendition that I went ahead and upgraded with various metal parts and other details to bring it up to the specs you see here. More information, of course, is mentioned in the video series, which I strongly recommend checking out. Makes for a fun watch. But this model here is basically going to be getting many of the modifications and detail accessories that went into this guy, with the exception of probably a few extras because some more details were developed since I finished this model here. And more information on this is definitely going to come in video part 2 and 3 of this series. Well, with compare and contrast and show and tell out of the way, the rest of the model's exterior, you can see that the model's hatches were all taped up with these green strips of masking tape. This is common on all of the Taigen models, and if your model is missing these strips here, chances are it was opened prior to you getting it. Now, that should wrap up basically the exterior of the model, which now brings us to the inside, which, to do that, you know what time it is.
Hey, pop the hood.
Pop the hood?
Pop the hood.
Which, on one of these late production Taigens, is a really easily done procedure. On the back, there's a small little latch located in this section over here. Now, this is true for all of the Taigen Tiger I's, be it an early, late, mid, plastic, metal upgraded, doesn't matter. All of them open with the same little convenient way. Now, what further makes this model even that much more easier is the fact that it's a late production Tiger. On the mid and late production Tigers, getting access to the inside is a hell of a lot easier compared to an early rendition because of the lack of the FIFO system. On early production Tigers, we have these elaborate air canisters and tubes which run across the grillework here and enter into the engine hatch. Because of that, in order to get access to an early production Tiger, it's always a chore because you have to manually unplug these tubes in order to get inside, and once the model is built, painted, and detailed, not to mention weathered, doing this will cause nothing but problems. And this is true for all Tiger I's that are runnable from 135 motorized to 1/6 scale armor techs. FIFO systems are always a pain in the ass. Now, on this guy here, obviously, that's not going to be the case. Here we have that little latch. It's found right here. You can probably see it. You just hit it like that. It opens up a little can, and then from there, you can just lift the top deck directly off. Now, note, just because this is a metal upgraded Tiger I, most of the parts are still going to be plastic. The parts that are still plastic on these metal upgraded Taigens is the lower hull sidewall tub and the upper hull. Now, on all Taigens, the lower body hull panel is made from metal. This piece here, obviously, made from aluminum. The turret, like I said before, is all metal, and it's comprised of die cast, which again gives it its big, hefty weight. Now, here you can see the jacks. Now, the plugs on this are very standard on all of the Taigen models. We have here one main subloom, which connects the entire upper turret functions to the lower. But because this model is the infrared version, as opposed to the airsoft BB firing version, there are a few extra bits of plugs which need to be disconnected. Now, I'm not going to disconnect them at this time in this video because I need to mark them before I unplug them, which saves time during the rebuild process, as you know exactly where each of the little plugs gotta go. I will say that the turret does have a 360 rotating system. Then in frame. The turret turner is a 360 system. The 180 system has a little tab located here on the front. That's not present on this version here. And the wires have a slip ring located right over here in the corner. Now, because this is the infrared firing version, it has a flash strobe in the front, and the barrel does recoil backward with the animation system that you see here. Going on to the rest of the internal components, here you can see the Taigen smoke system. Now, the smoke system is nothing really much to mention. It's your stock unit that has that little motor that has a little baffle system and a puff smoke out. Now, you can notice that the smoke system has these two tubes that emerge right on the top portions here of the exhaust manifold, which are a bit unsightly and are one of the weaker points on these RTR models. Of course, during the rebuild, I'm going to completely redesign this, and that will be discussed as the video progresses, or I should say in part 2 of the video. Here we have the speaker, again, stock system. Now, I believe this is the upgraded speaker because the electronics that Taigen upgraded to improve the sound quality on this unit, although visually it looks exactly the same from the older comparisons. Here's the motherboard. Now note, this is the version that can have a switchable radio where you can replace the stock radio with a hobby grade radio, if desired. And here we have the ball bearing gearbox. Now this is something that I frequently mention on these videos because generally when you purchase a plastic edition Taigen, the gearboxes are going to be sometimes a zinc metal alloy, which are proven to be inferior and usually need to be replaced by the builder. This model, however, one of the perks of going with the metal upgrade one is that this is already done for you. The gearbox here is, again, the steel ball bearing gearbox, and it is a fantastic gearbox. I have literally nothing but praise for this system, and if you have a model that has either a plastic gearbox like a Henlong or the zinc glass jaw metal gearbox found on the older plastic and even the older metal editions of the Taigen tanks, I highly recommend investing in one of these systems. You can't go wrong. Again, these are sold on the TaigenTanks.com website. From the gearbox, we have here a sound volume knob. Now these tend to move on these Taigens throughout the generation. Sometimes they're here in the center, sometimes they're over here, and this model, it's conveniently located under the driver's hatch, which is a nice touch. The main on and off switch is located underneath the radio operator's hatch and is generally standard on these models. Now, oddly enough, I don't see the little red smoke system shutoff switch anywhere on the inside, and generally this little bit of equipment is located in a multitude of different places, like I mentioned before with the volume switch. But this one here looks like they omitted it. Again, not surprised, as I've seen few units that have this unit omitted as well. Again, it just depends really on the luck of the draw on these builds. Now, here in the front, we have a rigidity brace. I have seen these on a few other renditions of the Taigen, the plastic ones included. Now, on the metal upgraded one, this is going to be double important. One of the, I should say, drawbacks of the metal upgraded Taigens is because of the weight of this turret here. A lot of stress is being placed here on the sponson supports. In fact, a number of years ago, I did an early production metal upgraded Taigen, which had significant damage done to the sponsons because of the heavy weight of the turret. In fact, I strongly recommend checking out that video as well. You can see exactly how I fixed them. Well, that's basically it. Let me temporarily get this guy back together again. With the tank back together, I can now go ahead, take it to the shop, and start the teardown and rebuilding process. Well, here's the turret now going through its revision process. Note the roof sections have already been revised, and because this is a late production Tiger I, it would feature the extra armor sections fitted to these two portions over here to give better protection against fighter bombers. The panels themselves are fabricated from 1/8 inch thick Lexan, which is the material that I've used on all of my other Taigen 116 late production builds that are found on the channel. You'll also notice that in addition to the armor plates, I also swapped out the loader's hatch from the kit original with this one here from Shapeways.com. The 3D printed one was utilized because the original molded in, or I should say the kit supplied version of the hatch, is for an early production Tiger, and for a late production Tiger with these type of specs, that hatch would not be accurate. So it was pitched in place for this one we have here. This hatch here is basically identical to the one used on the King Tiger, and the unit from Shapeways is a fantastic drop-in installation for anyone who's undergoing a rebuild like the one I'm doing here. The link can be found in the video description listed below. The other components, namely the center air blower as well as the close-quarter defense weapon, are the kit original ones and were recycled. In order, of course, to recycle them, you need to first pop them off prior to the installation of the roof panels. There are some other details to point out, namely the internal fastener mounts that are found on the section here of the turret as well as around the close-quarter weapon, but these and the other details are going to be discussed in more depth in part 2 of this video. Back to the Commander's cupola, however, this is where things get interesting when you're doing one of these type of conversions. Like I mentioned earlier on in the unboxing portion of the video, the Taigen Tiger I has an interesting quirk in regards to the cupola mount that's molded into the top of the turret. Because they recycled the early production Tiger I moldings, they had to make some modifications to the cupola dimensionally in order to make it fit onto the early drum mount. Luckily, if you're rebuilding the model or if you're accurizing it like I am here, this quirk here is not something that is terminal or is a deal breaker, and is something that can be dealt with by the builder, with using the stock parts no less. If you're building the model like this version here with the armored roof, the procedure is actually easier compared to if you're doing one of the few late Cupola equipped Tiger Is that did not have the extra armor fitted to the roof. Because the plates that are added are 1/8 of an inch thick, this does gobble up a lot of the vertical sections that are found on the early drum cupola mounts. There is still a little bit of material that's remaining that's above the Lexan surface, and then there's the inner portion that pops up further for the cupola to clip onto it. These sections need to be removed and are relatively easily done. On the plastic edition of the Tiger, it's even more simpler because, of course, with the parts being plastic, the Dremel and a file can make some really quick work of it. With this model here, it was a little bit more complicated because, again, this one here is the metal version, and the entire top tooling here is made out of die-cast metal. It's still possible, it just takes a little bit more work to do, and does put a little bit more wear and tear on the tools while doing it, but again, it's not something that is impossible. Now, like I just hinted on, if you're doing the same procedure to one of the Tigers that did not have the turret roof sections, you do have to remove a little bit more material compared to this one here with the extra armored roof. Again, it's doable, but it just takes a little bit more hands-on work to accomplish. For the cupola itself, here I have the revised cupola. You'll notice that the profile is different compared to the way it was originally. If we recall from earlier on in the video, this bottom portion here descends further down, and this was done by Taigen in order to have this piece fit onto the early drum cupola mounts that are integrally molded to the turret. Well, with those mounts completely flushed and amputated away, this unit now can be at the appropriate height. With the bottom portion removed, you can actually see how much better it looks profile-wise when it sits on the roof here of the turret and doesn't have that standoff like it would on the original Taigen, which again is a bit of a ding on the stock Taigen kits. One thing to point out though is that when you shorten the cupola, you do have to make some modifications to the turret portion here. Namely, on this one being the IR version, you have to lower the internal plate that has the plug here for the IR emitter for the RC tank battles. I believe that's what this is for. If you're using the airsoft version, this modification here is just not necessary. But because of the way the plug here sits on this table, on the stock kit, this piece of plastic here is butt up directly against the turret molding. And why this is a problem is because when you shorten the cupola, it's now going to make contact here with the cupola hatch, and it's actually going to prop the hatch up. So this unit here needs to be lowered about 1/8 of an inch. The way this is done is pretty simple. The plastic plate here is actually fastened to the turret via these two Phillips head fasteners. All I did was I removed the fasteners, dropping the plate from the turret roof. I then fabricated some spacers out of some Plastruct stock. 4 total. These are glued to the roof plate, and then once I drill the holes, the unit just gets bolted directly in place with the same method as it was originally, but it is now lower by 1/8 of an inch, thus making up the difference from the original material that was removed from this cupola that we have here. However, that's not the only modification that you need to do. The next involves this little section. Because of the way these cupolas work, you have a fastener that it's used to hold the hatch onto the tank, but it also allows it to pivot and function. Well, one thing about these cupolas is that when the hatch goes into its home state and goes down, it descends downward from the cupola ring. If the stock unit was kept, this wouldn't be a problem because, again, there's that extra bit of material here to allow for that clearance. But with that material removed, and with the material removed from this section here, the fastener is going to make contact with this portion here of the roof, illustrating it like so. Now, once the cupola is appropriately put in place, you'll see that no matter what, the hatch will not seat properly in its home location. Now, normally this is a really easy fix. All you gotta do is just make a hole in this section over here. On the plastic renditions, you can just use a Dremel with a router bit or a drill bit. I personally like to use a router bit like this one over here. And you just remove the necessary amount of material until the hatch fastener just goes in and out of this section over here without any contact in a nice smooth manner. Because this model here is the metal edition, however, it's going to be a little bit more complicated. Again, still doable, just a little bit more hands-on with the work. Rather than the router bit, which can do the job, but it'll just destroy the hell out of the bit, I'm going to use this high-speed removal bit that I have here, found on this Dremel. I'm just going to go ahead and just remove the section that I mounted with the Sharpie. This is one of those procedures where you're going to make your cuts, visually inspect, and then try it on with the actual part. If more material needs to be removed, you go ahead and remove accordingly. You do this until finally you have the component fitting properly in its place. And with the amount of material removed, you can see that the hatch now goes completely flush in its home state as it's supposed to. Here you can see the amount of material removed. And like what was just shown, the Dremel with the high-speed removal bit does short work of the die-cast metal. You could use the exact same tool, of course, on the plastic edition of these kits. However, one more thing I want to point out before I permanently mount the cupola to the roof is with the Periscope Inserts. You see, this unit does utilize the ECA 1/16 scale late production Tiger Cupola Periscope Insert set. Bit of a mouthful, but you can see exactly how much it improves the unit from the stock original offering. Of course, the cubbies are molded in place and they are hollow on the stock unit, but the internal periscope details are absent. And this is true for both plastic and metal variants of these components that are found online and come with the Taigen models. In order to properly mount the pieces on, the cupola does have to be removed off of the tank's surface. You just pop it off, and then from here you get access to the underside. Now, on this model here, or on all of my models, I like to pre-paint the inside portion here with the Dunkelgelb, just so it thoroughly covers the inside portion here of the little cubbies. The periscopes are also pre-painted prior to the installation, with both their external box paint as well as their little lenses that you can see here reflecting in the light. Once the units are fitted and before the model goes into paint, these of course will all be masked up with some tape and tissue paper to protect them from the final paintwork, which will be added to this model at that point. Like I said before, the only way to mount these to the model are from underneath. With the way the sets are designed, you cannot mount them in from the external portion of the vehicle, nor can you really mount them in by opening up the hatch and trying to snake your finger in here like this in order to prop them in place. Really, the best and only way to install these components is by popping off the cupola and just dropping them into the section that we have here. They just glue directly in place, and once in, really do improve the look of the stock detailing on the piece. While the tank is in construction, one of the major aspects that the customer wanted on this build was to convert it from a standard Tiger I to a command variant of the Tiger I. In order to do so, I needed to go ahead and tool up some new detail components, and now I finally got the parts back from the printer, and here we have the details strewn out on the table. Outside of these parts being utilized on this build, these components are also going to be offered as a conversion set and are going to be listed on the EastCoastArmory.com catalog page. Let me bring the camera in closer so you get a better idea on what these pieces actually look like. Well, the first and easiest thing to mention is the wire, which is supplied with the set. Obviously, this is to be used for the internal wire itself. So, with that out of the way, we can get to the actual heart of the set. The set itself is going to contain these 4 components, which are all made from HD printed materials, which gives some very good surface detailing, which is required for these parts. Starting with this component that we have here, this is the runner, which consists of the antenna bases. Note that on this vehicle here, there are 3 antenna bases which are utilized. And also note that they are in 3 different sizes. Once these are fitted to the vehicle, you'll see exactly how they mount on and exactly where they go. The biggest unit to point out is this large unit, which has its own little well, and this unit gets mounted on the upper hull where the normal antenna base generally would go. What's unique about this one, though, is that you'll see that, hopefully this comes out on screen, but there is a large insulator which is mounted directly below the antenna base. This is found only on this version of the antenna with the well, and it's only seen on the command variants of these German tanks. The King Tiger had one very similar, but it was a lot taller in its overall shape, but that's really out of the scope of this particular video. Anyway, as for the details themselves, now note on the real vehicle, these would be made out of rubber, of course, and I generally mentioned this and how to paint them in the second half of this video, but you can also see that they all 3 of them have their wing nut detailing present and integrally printed on. The next runner consists of these other odds and ends, which consists of a clamping hinged vise type mechanism, as well as some filler spouts. It's pretty tricky to get on screen again with this material. Moving along brings us to this bit of detailing here, which is frankly, a large bracketed tube. This would be used in tandem with those other vise mechanisms that I just mentioned. You see, like I said before, when the vehicle would be in use, those telescoping sections of pipe which would connect to form the longer antenna wire, well, they would be disconnected and they need to be stowed somewhere. On the command variant of the Tiger I, they would go in this large tube that I have right here. Note this model here has its little clasp detailing found on this section. Now on this model here it is static, but the detailing is still present. On the real unit this would unlatch and then you would stow the tubes on the inside. You could also see how it's elevated from the hull via these brackets, and the brackets do have their well detailing pre-printed onto this component. From the tube now takes to the last and probably the most iconic component for this set, and that's concealed in its own little transport case, and that's the umbrella mast type antenna. The piece itself needs this cage structure just for shipping purposes because of the frail nature of the antenna, but when it comes time for actual construction and display of the model, obviously all this structure here is going to be cut and removed away. And here we have the model with all of its final details fitted, and at this point here it's ready for painting. One of the more important mods that I always make to these late production Tigers involve these clips on the side. Now of course these clips are for the track removal cables. The kit does supply you with track removal cable, but the cable is for a early production Tiger, and this being a late pattern tank, it's not going to be appropriate for this build. So I went ahead and replaced them with the units that we see here. These pieces are scratch built out of sections of metal and brass and are all soldered together, and then are secured to the hull. Like I've stated in other builds, these pieces here, you have to make them out of metal because of the stress of radio control running, and also with the actual cable itself. The cable is going to be a real metal cable that's going to be mounted to these pieces here, and if you're using plastic for this in this scale, it's just not going to work. It's going to be very frail and will probably lead to issues. If anyone's curious on how I actually produce these and make the cable itself, I actually have a tutorial video that's found on the ECA channel where I go over this in more depth in case anyone wants to try one of these type of detail mods on their own tanks. With the vehicle now positioned to this corner, you get to see some of the command tank mods that have been made. First, we have a secondary antenna base located in this section over here, and then we have the antenna storage tube. These are the same details that were showcased before, but now you get to see them fitted to the tank. The pieces are fitted to the tank without any problems. All you gotta do is mark where the hole locations need to be, drill them out with a Dremel or a pin vise, and then secure to the model. Once added, the pieces are ready to go. And here we have, on the opposite side of the tank, the remainder of the command tank equipment. Starting with the large welded and sunk in antenna base, followed by the fuel filler spout for the electrical generator, and even the mounts for the antenna mast. The antenna mast mounts themselves are semi-functional in that the lever does not work, it's there just for detailing, but the piece can hinge out of the way like you see it here. You also have the opportunity to render this vehicle with its antenna mast in its deployed state, where you would have the mast secured into these two locations here, and then you would have to have guidelines run down to the ground, keeping everything secured in place. I also want to point out that when it comes to the actual alignment and the locations where these pieces go, your best resource is going to be online. There are a few pictures of the Dragon 1/35 scale kits out there, and as well as their instructions that have a good layout on where everything goes. But another fantastic resource is the surviving example in the Kubinka Tank Museum. That tank is a mid-production Tiger I, and it's a command tank, and I believe it's the only one in the world in that configuration. There are some really good walk-around images that can be found with a Google search, and with those images in hand, you should easily be able to figure out where these components need to be fitted to the vehicle. From there takes us briefly to the turret. You can see all of the mods have been added at this point. The thicker armored roof sections have been fitted, along with all their welds and other detailing. The cupola has been shortened, like what was showcased before, but now you get to see exactly how it looks fitted to the vehicle. The inner periscopes have been added, and these are going to be masked up prior to the vehicle heading off into paint. The appropriate late production loader's hatch has been added. This is the Shapeways 3D printed component, and I'll be mentioning this in more depth in part 2 of this video series. And of course, we have our last small antenna base located right here on the rear portion of the turret. Other things I want to point out, you'll notice that I went ahead and added the Zimmer Coating to these areas here of the mantlet, as well as these two sections over here on the rear portion of the turret. These are absent on the stock Taigen model because, as we can recall, the Zimmerite is actually just a vinyl sticker really that secures and adheres to the side of the vehicle. And where the sections are not covered by the vinyl, you're just going to have the bare plastic smooth sections exposed. On the real vehicles, the Zimmerite would be found on these sections here, so I just simply added it, and doing this, it really does improve the look of the vehicle. Before I go on the inside, I want to mention one last thing, and that has to do with the rear mud flaps. These are the stock rear mud flaps, and they are going to be utilized on this build, but one change I made to them was with their inside sections. You see, on these RTR Tiger I's, and this is true for the Henlong and the Matto ones, I believe, as well, the interior sections of the mud flaps are void of any sort of detailing. On these models here, you do have these 6 knockout marks found in these sections, and in order to improve them, I just simply filled them in with some red putty and sanded them flush. While I was at it, with the Multimaster, I added the small little seam line found in this section over here, which of course on the real vehicle, this flap would be a hinged unit and would not be all-encompassing like the way you would see it on the rear portion here. By adding these small little details here, in a way it does improve the model from its stock original offering. And it's one of those little details that once you add it to the build, it makes you basically sleep better at night. Well, there are a lot more details that have been made to the tank, but I'll be going over those really in part 2 of this video series. From here, let's go ahead though and take the tank apart so we get to see some other mods that have been made to the tank interior. The vehicle still comes apart as your standard Taigen, that latch in the back, still fully functional. And with the top removed, you can see some of the additions that have been made to this model. Mechanically speaking, the model is left stock. Stock electronics with the radio and the CPU, stock sound card, stock smoke system, and the stock gearbox. One change that I did make, however, was with the power source. The original 7.2 battery was replaced with this aftermarket 5000 milliamp 7.2 battery that I have here. This battery I've used on lots of other builds in the past, and I've been happy with the performance on all of them. This battery will give you longer runtime, which will also give you better performance. The link is found in the video description listed below, where there's an Amazon link will take you to the exact vendor and source where I get these batteries from. Obviously, no other mods need to be made in order to use the battery. You just replace the kit one, strap the new one in, plug it in, and you're good to go. However, one other addition that I make, and this is another common one that I've done on these 116 builds, is for the recharge jack. This system here patches into the RC system between the battery and the kit electronics, and the way these work is you first have to have the tank off. I can't stress that enough. The tank must be off. Once the model is off and you want to recharge the tank, you open up your bow hatch, you yank this little power cord out, plug it into your charger of choice, and then let it do its thing. Once the tank is fully charged, you simply disconnect, stuff this fellow back into the vehicle, and you're off to the races. Why I like using this system on my builds is because once the model is fully built and detailed to the way you see it in its completed state, getting access to the interior becomes a bit problematic. Of course, when you super detail a model, the frailness and fragility does go up, regardless of what materials the details are even made of. So getting access to the interior is your sure bet way of damaging your details and possibly even harming the finish. This is why the recharge jack system is a really good advantage to have. With this system, you don't need to get access into the interior unless it's an absolute emergency. Or there is another reason for this build that I'll touch upon in a moment. These jacks here are sold on the ECA catalog and just drop directly in place on your RC tank. Now, there is apparently another system out there in Europe. One of my subscribers always points this out to me on these builds, where you have this smaller jack that plugs into the back over here. We don't have that in the United States. And also, with this system, I still wouldn't keep it back here because now you still have this eyesore of a system that is exposed on the model. So even if I was using one of those systems, I would still have it being stuffed out of the driver's hatch, just for, again, detail fidelity reasons. One other thing I want to point out is that I'm not sure about Europe, but here in the US, all of our 7.2 battery rechargers utilize a Tamiya style plug. So by using this plug here, it also streamlines the amount of equipment needed in order to keep your tank up and running. Otherwise, you need to have an adapter, and it just adds more complexity, and it just keeps these tanks, with this system, it keeps them easier to maintain and keep them up and running. Along the lines of the battery recharge jack, I also have a remote way to refill the model's smoke system. This is done with this tube that I have here. You pull this out of the radio operator's hatch, yank this little rubber topper off, and this is your fillet for the smoke system. Once you're done, you put the rubber topper back on, stuff this fellow back inside the tank, and you're good to go. Moving our way to the smoke system, you can see the mods that were made to the unit in order to facilitate the remote filling. On the stock unit, you have two nubs that come out of this plate over here, and these connect to tubes that go out to your exhaust stacks, and that's how they puff away. These two nubs are also used for the refilling of the system when need be. In order to set the system up to have the remote fill, one of the nubs is dedicated just for the refill, while the other nub is dedicated just for the smoke. In order to split the nub off so that the smoke goes to each of their smoke manifolds, a aquarium T-valve was fitted, and then the plumbing was just connected accordingly. You'll notice on this section over here, I added a length of spring. This is just to prevent the unit from kinking, which is something that can easily happen when you're working with rubber hoses like this. While on the smoke system, I want to touch upon the exhaust manifolds. Now, like I mentioned earlier in the video, the exhaust manifolds on these RTR Tiger Is leave some room for improvement. This is not just true for Taigen, but it's also true for Henlong and Matto as well. If you were to look at the back of your RTR Tiger I, the exhaust manifold sections over here would be completely vacant. There's just a huge cavity found on the rear sections here, and this has to do with the way these pieces are molded. This is one area that really does hurt the look on these models, and it's one of the locations that I focus on during these rebuilds in order to improve them. The units that you see on this model here are from EastCoastArmory.com. They are made from solid cast resin, but I drill them out so that they are hollow for the smoke to be focused out and emit from the top sections. We also have here the puffer caps, which are included with the set. The one thing that is not included with the set, however, are the rain guards. These are actually the kit ones, and the way the ECA set is designed is that you recycle the ones that are supplied with the kit. And this is true for, again, all of them, from Matto, Henlong, and Taigen. What you need to do is you have the top rain guards, you just simply snip off the molded in pegs, drill out where the fastener heads are, and then the kit supplies you with these wire brads that are used for the replacement details, and it's also how they connect to the resin base. On the back portion here, these are left stock. I actually recycle the stock heat shields, but I also recycle the stock armored covers, but there are some mods that go into them because of the way they were designed originally. On the original kit, you have these large plastic sections that protrude from the heat shields here that go through the armor cover, through the exhaust stack, and then into the rear of the tank. On the model, when I revise it, I amputate those sections and then everything gets glued together in a slightly different manner. But once it's all done, you keep the stock heat shields and the guards, but you have the better detailing of the inner manifold. The last thing I want to touch upon before this fella heads off into paint is the lighting system. The vehicle does have a functional bow headlight, but I also added a rear convoy light to this section over here. The rear convoy light is fabricated in my usual manner, where I turn from a piece of stock resin a housing, which is used basically as a light box. Inside here I have an LED, and then I use a fiber optic that exits out of the rear section into this clear tube, and this acts as the convoy light. The kit originally has the convoy light molded in, but I went ahead and amputated the middle section in order to give you the clear lens that we have here. Now, unfortunately, on this model here, for some reason, I can't get the tail light and the headlight to work with the stock system, which is very puzzling because I've used this exact same system on several other builds, but for one reason or another, on this one here, it's just not having it. And by the way, this is something that's not relatively unheard of. I ran into a similar issue years ago on a Henlong model, and basically I solved the problem the same way I did on this one, and that is to have the lights as an independent circuit. So on this one here, I have the headlight and the tail light, and they're both patched into the same system. This 2-pin plug over here connects to this little jack, and now you have the headlights and the taillights patched into each other. The lights are controlled via this switch that we have right here in the front, which once the tank's assembled, is directly under the loader's hatch. You hit it, and the lights now turn on. Here's the headlight, and there's the tail light. For the LED's power source, you have these two AA batteries that are right here mounted on the sponson. Now, unfortunately, with the way the kit is designed, I wasn't able to figure out a way to have the batteries come out through the hatches or even have a recharge jack for the batteries. So the batteries need to be changed on this tank, and unfortunately, to do this, you have to take the tank apart. Like I said before, taking the tank apart is pretty problematic. It's not something you want to do regularly, but luckily, with the usage of the AA's, these should last a very long time on account they're only being used to power the LEDs, which don't use a whole lot of electricity. And on top of that, you don't necessarily run the tank with the lights on all the time. But it is something you have to be aware of, that on this particular build, you have to change the batteries by taking the tank apart. Luckily, the batteries themselves are easily changed. They're right here, easy to access on the sponson. Just swap them out, and you're good to go. Of course, with the inner machinery and the exterior details out of the way, the model can then slide off into its painting procedure. At this point here, the model not only, of course, has been painted, but the camouflage has been added, and the weathering has also been applied as well. The wheels have been remounted to the vehicle, and at this point here, the model is now ready to get its tracks remounted. Along with the tank in paint, I now need to turn my attention to the tracks themselves. You see, the tracks that we have here are the stock original Taigen tracks, and like I've stated before, are absolutely phenomenal. In fact, I'll go so far as to say that the Taigen Tiger I tracks are the best 1/16 scale Tiger I tracks that are on the market. They're made from die cast, they have the accurate thread pattern on them, and they also have the accurate interior portion detailing, which will include enclosed hinges as well as the guide horns with the mud slits in them. The material that the tracks are also made out of are really robust as well. However, one aspect of the tracks that do make them problematic to enhance them further is with the surface material. You see, the tracks, like I may have mentioned before, and I have also mentioned in other videos, the tracks have a thin film of oil that are found on all of the external and internal surfaces of the track. This is done for a multitude of reasons. It keeps the tracks nice and fresh from the factory. It also helps with the lubrication of the links, making sure they break in evenly. And it more likely it probably helps with manufacture, the way they have them jigged up, and I wouldn't be surprised they have a pin inserting machine, and the oil helps during that process. With all of that, that's all well and good. However, when it comes time for taking the tracks and taking them to the next step, it can become problematic because of the surface residue of oil. You see, from here I'm going to take the tracks, I'm going to add the paint and weather them past the point here found on the stock offering, and this is when that oily residue becomes an issue. Fortunately, removing of the residue is easily done. All you need is a 1-gallon bucket like I have here, and the solution is nothing more than regular mineral spirits paint thinner. I just pour the stuff into the bucket until, as you can see, just the top portions are really left exposed. From here, after a few minutes, I just go ahead and I swirl them around, almost like I'm painting for gold. And this here should have the effect of cleaning off all of the oily residue found on the tracks. In fact, if you look at the paint thinner here, you'll see that it has a oily, blackish tint to it, which is the oil effectively being diluted in the solution and washing off the tracks themselves. The procedure is a fairly quick one. In about 5 or 10 minutes, or about 20 minutes or so, you should have enough of the residue off where you can take the tracks out and dry them out thoroughly. And that's exactly what I'm going to do here. So I'm just going to grab the tracks, shake off any remaining residue, or I should say any remaining paint thinner, and I'm just going to set these aside and let them aerate out. Currently, as I'm filming this, it's in the middle of the night, so I'm about to close up shop for the day. So by tomorrow morning, the track should be thoroughly dried off and be ready for me to add the paint to them. With the tracks removed, you can see the oily residue found on the paint thinner, but you can also see a lot of little particulate on the bottom of the bucket. This particulate all washed off of the tracks, and like I may have mentioned in another one of these Taigen rebuild videos, with the way the tracks are assembled, when the pins are inserted, a small bit of metal is actually cut away from the hinge mechanism, and it gathers up on the inside portion of the hinge link. Now, this amount of material is totally benign. It doesn't cause any sort of problems whatsoever with the way the tracks operate, nor does it wear down on the tracks as the model is driven. If you look at a lot of these RTR Taigens that are on YouTube or on the internet, some of them have more mileage than most cars out there, and I can assure you that they perform absolutely perfectly. However, it's interesting to point out that when you wash the tracks out with the paint thinner, you will see the little shavings on the bottom. So if you go through this procedure and you see the shavings, don't panic or worry, it's totally fine. Well, after letting the tracks sit for the night to dry out, here you can see what the final outcome is from the wash. The tracks are nice and clean. They don't have any of that oily residue that was mentioned before. And the surface is now perfect for me to apply the paint to. Now, when it comes for painting, one paint that I love to use on these models here is this color right over here from Rust-Oleum. It's just a dark gray primer. These things can be found in just about any hardware store. And one nice thing about these paints is that they have a really nice look to it. Once they fully dry, they really give that black oxide or that parkerization look that you see on the surface of these track links on the real vehicles. This paint here I've used on all of my 1/16 scale radio control tanks, as well as a large number of my 1/6 scale radio control tanks as well. If anyone is a fan of my Armor Tech builds, you'll know that this is the paint that I use for those tracks. The paint itself, like I said, has a really good color to it and is recommended for this use. However, it does have some caveats to it. First and foremost, only use this paint on tracks that are made from metal. If you have tracks that are either made of plastic or rubber, keep away from this paint. This paint is definitely not recommended for that. This will cause nothing but problems, and it can possibly harm or mutilate the plastic material and definitely the rubber. So if you're doing a 1/35 scale tank and you have rubber tracks, don't use this. Keep far and steer clear away from this paint. However, if your model's using metal tracks from Frula Model or Master Club, and of course those tracks are made from a metal alloy, they will be completely impervious to any sort of problems from this paint here. This is also true for tracks that are made out of cast resin. Cast resin and polystyrene, of course, are two totally different materials and have different attributes to them, and the cast resin material will also be impervious to the same paint. And with that, that wraps up part 1 of this 3-part video series on this 1/16 scale radio-controlled command variant late production German Tiger I. If you like this video, be sure to subscribe to this channel, where it's a great way to keep up to date on new posted content like the other 2 chapters for this particular video series here, not to mention the other smaller and larger scale builds that frequently get posted to this channel. If you also want to keep in the loop of new posted content, don't forget to swing by and like us on Facebook. There I have more photographs of this particular build, as well as the other smaller and larger scale builds that are showcased on this channel. Furthermore, don't forget to swing by eastcoastarmory.com for more 1/16 and 1/6 scale builds and detail components. Thanks for watching, and I'll be catching you guys again on part 2.